Hey, my wonderful, wonderful people, a pleasant evening to you. All right, beauties, wonderful people. I was on TikTok this evening listening to somebody doing a live against the 7 boys. I think it's between 5 to 7 boys who I think they had videotaped themselves really viciously molesting. I'm going to say the word. I noticed that we're adding G to the word RAPE these days, but I think I have a little bit of issue where that is concerned. Yes, I'm a little bit concerned that they're adding G to the the RAPE, because what is happening now, our communication is going to be a little bit more entangled. It's going to be caught in a sort of a web when we're having a discussion. And if somebody's talking freely about grapes itself, I'm talking about the fruit grape, the very nutritious fruit grape. People may be wondering, if they're talking about grape itself or the vicious act of molestation and harassment physically. So it can create and trick the brain in such a way that you have to know, say, oh, they're talking about this, and set your mind in such a way to understand the context and the meaning of a word. I don't think it is good that we're using a word to have both a double and a positive, a double meaning, which is both positive and negative. I understand the bureaucracy behind TikTok and other social media platforms, but I think there are many other words that falls under that 4-letter word that we could use instead of adding a G to it, since it represents something that is good. I actually don't join in with it. I think there's so many words, and that is why it is important for us to read, so that we don't substitute a word that is good or use a word that we use in the positive in the negative. So I'm not in support of the grape, to substitute for the, as we call that 4-letter RAPE word. All right. So 5 to 7 boys caught. I didn't see the video of it. I don't know if I can manage it, but I remember seeing some boys in a room. I guess, I don't know if it's before or after, they were so sweaty in their uniform. They looked really, dirty. Like, they look unkempt, sweating, and and so on. And one of the things that people often believe is that when you see men or women display certain kinds of behavior, we make the assumption, subliminally or overtly, that they must have gone through that particular trauma. And that is not necessarily so. That is not necessarily so. When was it Charles Manson? I think this renowned Christian man who was interviewing him, because he respected him, Charles Manson. And this man, Charles Manson, I don't want to call the man's name wrong, but I don't know if I have his name, but I'm going to tell you the notorious murderer. When I continue the story, someone will pick up, and I may not have his name correctly right now. His name always slipped me, and I don't know who to look for if I'm going to research it. But I think his first name may be Charles. And, he was a serial murderer. But when you check the historicity of it, or the background of his story, it wasn't that he was molested or abused physically. It really was the family dynamics. It was just one of those ordinary, you would call it dysfunctional family, where I think his sister really was his mother, and they lied to him. And he often mentioned how the lie affected him. He was engaged, and that didn't work out. I think it mentioned that he started, like some boys who, killing small things, maybe lizards and so on, and then it moved up to like cats and whatnot. And they talk about, once you see them starting to kill these cats or some sort of animal, the lower form of mammals, then it will escalate into something further. But it did not, the background, or the foundation did not begin in some level of abuse. It didn't speak to him being abused, sexually or whatever it is. What it spoke to, when he was much younger, is a sense of lawlessness. There was no governance, there was no accountability. So there was lawlessness, godlessness in a sense. Meaning he was able to do what he did. There was a time when they mentioned that he you know, had knives coming at his, I don't know if it was his grandmother, whomever it is, and I think they kind of threw it under the bus. So they saw something and they did not address it the right way. It was not comprehensively dealt with. He was not disciplined. They didn't follow the scripture that says, train up a child in the way he should go, that when he's old, he doesn't depart from it. There's a reason why God says, write these scriptures on tablets, teach them to your children day and night, because he knows how we are. Remember, you know, Jean Piaget talks about the 4 stages of development. This is, you know, fashioning, like, for example, the potter with the clay. When you're forming the pot, you'd have to, even if you break up the pot, you'd have to get a brand new pot, you know, for you to say it's a different kind of a pot. So when it forms and it sets, you can't make it become as before it was formed and set. So you have, you know, let's find it here now, the stages of development. Sensory motor stage, birth to 2 years, understanding the world through sensory experiences and physical actions. Pre-operational stage, 2 to 7 years, very significant. 1 to 3, you have to really focus there. And then they tell you up to 7, you have to, you know, increase that focus. And then you cement that focus 7 to 12. But, you know, the pre-operational stage, development of language and symbolic thinking, using symbols and or words to represent objects and ideas. So you're building a little of their intelligence quotient and their emotional intelligence. Concrete, so you're concretizing, as we talk about the 0 to 7 years. Concrete operational stage, logical thinking develops, but only for concrete, tangible concepts. So they don't get into that. They don't have that deep emotional intelligence as yet as adults. All right. Formal operational stage, ability to think abstractly, you know, using the emotional intelligence logically and systematically. As I say, 12 years and up. So you see 0 to 12, significant. Once you get them between those stages, then depending on what is imparted and what is allowed, you will know, generally speaking, the kind of child that child will be as an adult. So the adults that you see today, they were there between 0 to 12 years of age. If you can go back to that, you remember some things and say, except for divine intervention and God's transformation, like what he did with Saul, who became Paul, and other people. Let me tell you, that child's future is dark and dim and grim. These boys may not have been molested at all. What happened is that they were never held accountable for their actions. You have some parents, when children are using indecent language, when they're being rude and disrespectful, because they don't say the words properly, and their children, and it's childish, it sounds very cute to the parents, and they say, them sound cutie, Lord, leave them alone, because them boxing you or kicking you. I remember a young lady was kicking her aunt off a chair, and nobody did anything. They watched it. So these are the things many times, oftentimes, contribute to the type of child that you see. So these boys who would have viciously, rapaciously molested, and I'm using that word just in case that 4-letter word can't be used here, more than likely in the 4 stages of development, they were not taught discipline, being held accountable. These are the do's and these are the don'ts. You don't behave this way, you don't speak this way, you don't act this way. If you do, there are serious consequences that you will have to face. It doesn't mean that they themselves were molested. And that is a problem we have here in this country. We are not looking at the the parenting that is going on behind the scene. We are looking at the final, the outcome, the finished product. And then what we want to do is be draconian and deal with it that way. And then more like, I'm not calling them, you know how like when you have rodents and so on, how they will breed up, because you're not dealing with the root problem. The problem continues, it escalates and it gets worse. You know, the book of Exodus, when it got, Moses was giving out the commandments, it talked about, you know, the sins, I the Lord am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, those who are rebellious. So I'm not surprised. And until we deal with things the right and proper way, these things are going to get worse. Guys, you know what to do. Read TikTok and YouTube. Subscribe. Give me one of them lie on the plate.